Hi everyone, and welcome to Trauma-Informed Education. My name is Dr. Govind Krishnamurthy, and I'm here as always with Dr. K.A. Hi, Kai.
Hi, Govind. How are you today?
I'm great, thank you. We're speaking with Liz today, which is very exciting. Hi, Liz. How are you?
Hello, Govind. Hello, Kay.
Hi.
It's lovely to speak to you again, Liz. We've worked with you at the Sadadeen Primary School in Alice Springs, and we've worked together for quite a while now. So it's lovely to be able to catch up and reflect on some of the work we've done. And I suppose we're focusing today on a framework of trauma-informed educational leadership. Really, you were the principal there at Sadadeen for quite a long time. So thank you for taking the time to speak to us today.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
So Liz, we'll jump right into it. So this is a 3-part series. So in this very first part, we're focusing in on the students themselves and thinking about their experience at the school and their kind of relationships within the school community. What would be your kind of thoughts about what trauma-informed practice actually makes us understand about what students need in the school environment, Liz?
Well, in thinking about that, the first thing that really springs to mind for me is safety. So safety was a very big part of our thinking initially, safety for students, but safety also for staff, and just that feeling that school was a safe place for kids. So, you know, how you create that feeling of safety for kids so that the students want to come to school and that they feel that they're part of the school and that it's their school, really. So I guess there was a real need to have a mindset shift around that whole thing about what children need or what our kids needed, and change that thinking for us that all behaviour communicates a need, and understanding that need, and then working together as a group to try and meet that need. And initially, the need was quite basic. So the need was, we need a uniform so that we look as though we belong to school. We don't have any food in the morning, so we need breakfast before we can learn because we haven't had food. We need maybe a place to have a shower. We might need shoes. So quite basic sort of needs. We need to be welcomed into the classroom and feel that we're part of the classroom. We need people to accept us as we walk through the door and not reject us because we're running late or because we need to sit outside for a while because something's happened at home. We need to have the trust that we can connect with you and you will listen to what we have to say and not judge what we need. So those very fundamental basic needs were things that we needed to take quite seriously with that initial aspect of safety for the kids. So that there was that sort of physical safety sense. Also that sense that we needed to connect with families in that space too, because families often would bring kids to school and would be tentative about whether they were going to be judged because of the way the kids looked, or because they didn't have breakfast, or because someone in the family had passed away and they didn't really want to tell us about that, or something had happened at home and they didn't want to tell us about that. So just being able to accept them into the school too and say, you're welcome, the child, you know, they're here, that's fine, anything we need to know, you know, do we need to drop them at home, blah, blah, blah. So that whole thing about the safety of the relationship, I suppose, in the school, and for the kids to feel safe there. A lot of our kids, we discovered later on, came to school because it was a safe place. They didn't come to school to learn, you know, they didn't say we're coming to school to learn. they said, we're coming to, well, they didn't even say it. They would turn up at school because it was safe. And they knew then, as time went on, that nobody would judge them, that they could have food, they could sit in the sandpit if they needed to do that, all morning if they needed to do that, and nobody would give them a hard time, and that was their safe place. Some of them would even just go to sleep and sleep for 2 hours. I mean, it's a fairly extreme case. So safety was a really, really important aspect of it. And we did a bit of work with Dr. John Howard. John Howard? No, Howard Bath. Sorry, John Howard. You can edit that one out, Govind. Howard Bath, and he had the 3 pillars of trauma-informed care, and safety was right up there for him too. So, you know, that safety of the kids. And then that translated to safety for staff. So when you've got a relationship with the child, you feel much more inclined not to, you know, not to set that child up to get angry. And so your relationship with them is your safety too. And so that physical safety then follows through.
I think that's a really interesting idea you were talking about, you know, just flipping that kind of deficit narrative around special needs for these children to, you know, thinking about them as having additional rights. And I think, Kay, you've talked about that too, about, you know, offering, you know, part of safety is this idea that you're offering them access to the things they need within that school environment. And some of that is practical, but some of that, like you're saying, is about what's going to help them feel okay and not judged and not heightened or angry.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Kay, did you want to say anything about those additional rights and how that kind of plays out in school environments?
I was just thinking as you were both talking as well, in my experience in general, what a huge mind shift that is for the average teacher. Because we're so, like even the literature, as Gavin says, we still talk about children with special needs. And while what's underlying it, hopefully, is a strengths-based approach, the labels still have those connotations to a deficit model historically, don't they? Children with special needs in special education, whatever. Instead of looking at the child first, who just happens to have additional needs. So our whole institution and the way we look at things is not from a child's voice and them at the centre, really. It tends to be, this is what we think is the best for you, therefore we are deeming this upon you, sort of thing. I think that, which you probably explain either in, or chat about, Liz, in this episode or the next episode, how do you actually get people to start moving towards being okay when they look out of their classroom and they think, that child's been in that sandpit for 3 hours, that's not good. Instead of, that child's been in the sandpit, that's great, he's in the school, he must need to be there.
That's
you know,
what they need.
You know.
It's a very big shift, Kay, as you would know. And expecting people to do that in a school, expecting staff to do that, is a big shift too, because, you know, schools are so institutionalized in a way. And, you know, for us, we had to realise that we needed to shift that structure, you know, because when you think of a school, if kids had a lot more say in how schools operated, you get a sense that they would be much more productive and happier places.
Yes.
And the idea that if a child walks into our buildings, because that's what schools effectively are, and we say, this is what you have to do in our school, these are the rules of our school, and you need to do all these things, and if you don't, you won't be welcome in our school. Now, that is often the message we give to kids.
Yep.
We needed to shift that narrative to say, this is your school. And it wasn't quite a democratic model, because that goes a wee bit too far, I think, the democratic schooling model. But it was to say, this is your school. what do you need us to do to make this work for you? So it was that whole shift of, you know, that whole institutional thing. Like when you do a lot of PDs in schools, as you would have done, Kay, and everyone does, the focus is always on learning outcomes.
Yep.
Learning outcomes and how we collect the data and, you know, interrogate the data and make our plans around that for kids to learn more effectively or to get better results. And when you sort of get locked into that, you miss the point that it's really about the child that you need to focus on and how are they going to learn and what are the different styles we need to adopt to help them to learn. And, you know, and what does learning look like in our schools? So all those things we had to think about and talk about a lot and model. So, you know, I guess if you go on with an idea like that, you've got to back yourself. You can't sort of go in and say to everyone, this is what we're going to do. So, you know, you've got to believe that that's a really good attitude and you've got to sell it and you've got to bring people on board. And when they see that it starts to work, then they come on board. And then you somehow have to sell it to your colleagues, which is a much harder thing to do, I'd have to say. But certainly, you know, it would be great to think that in years to come, that whole thinking around what is a school might shift a little bit in people's minds and they might become a little bit more open and friendlier, although schools are quite friendly, I suppose, for kids, but a little bit more, I suppose, directed by the students who are in the school rather than this is how schools are supposed to be.
I remember one of your staff saying in a conversation that we had that one of her biggest learnings from the trauma-informed study and the PD and stuff that she did was that the environment had to fit the child.
Yeah.
The child shouldn't be forced to fit the environment that was there, which is what we tend to do. This is the environment, you need to fit in with us. And that was part of her, you know, flipping her mindset around that the environment needs to fit the child.
Yeah, because if you were a kid, how would you want your classroom to look? You know, Stephen Heppel did some great work and it was quite inspirational in that space. You know, I sort of loved some of his concepts and ideas, and of course that all takes money and things like that. But, you know, the great idea of having a running track around a school, and when children get a little bit, you know, unsettled, come on, how many times can you run around the running track before you feel you can come back into the classroom? Track your steps, you know, take a Fitbit with you or something and go round and calculate that, you know, those sorts of clever little initiatives. Or, you know, I loved remote control cars and I had them in the front office for a while, which drove the front office staff crazy, I'd have to say. But I did love them. And the kids would come in and they'd take a remote control car and they could drive it around the school and then drive it back to me before the battery ran out. And, you know, people were a bit, oh, there's these kids around, you know, they're driving them into things. And, well, you know, you try and drive a remote control car around the school. It's a lot trickier than you think. Yeah. So, you know, they would feel it was a great idea. They would feel a bit inspired. They would look forward to doing it. It gave them a bit of a hook, you know. Well, if you know, get this little bit of work done, you could go to Miss Lizzie's office and drive the remote control car around the school once. Yeah. And if kids were feeling a little bit unsettled, just to be able to do that, you know, it's a confidence building thing, it's a trust thing, it's a relationship building thing. Ticks a lot of boxes, those little things that most schools would go, no, that's too disruptive. We can't have that happening.
I'll be the devil's advocate or voice of the people say that. I mean, one of the things that often comes up is when we talk about these things is, you know, how can schools be everything to all kids with all these different needs? And you know, there's inevitably the question of equity around, you know, how does discipline work? Are we kind of letting these kids get away with not engaging in curriculum? Are we doing them a disservice of not enforcing these rules? Well, what is your sort of position on that in terms of, what from a trauma-informed leadership kind of point of view, what is inclusion, when it comes to these kids who need it? Yeah.
Well, initially, it was a problem. Initially, kids would want to do certain things in the school. For instance, and we've talked about this before, I had toys in my office. Lots of toys, puzzle toys and Lego and all sorts of things. Kids would come to my office when they were feeling a little bit about to blow, I suppose, when they were feeling a bit discombobulated, and they could sit there and play with toys. They didn't have to talk, they didn't have to do anything, they could just play with toys. Now, initially staff said, that's not fair. And other kids said, that's not fair, we want to do that too. But once we explained to kids, and we could explain it to the whole class, the whole school, in fact, because we used to have morning musters where we would talk about things that were going to happen during the day, that kids get what they need, not what they want. And so your turn might come, or you mightn't need to do that. You might be able to learn all right in the classroom without having to do anything extra, like go out and play in Miss Lizzie's office, or run around the running track, or go out and kick the footy with so-and-so, but you might like to do this if you finish your work, and that's a little bit different. You might be in a special maths group, or you might get the opportunity to do robotics with a special group because you can concentrate and focus really well. Kids understand that. And I reckon it took 6 months before it wasn't a problem anymore. We didn't have 20 kids in the front office all wanting to come and play with the toys. We had 1 or 2, they bought a little note, they had a timer, and when that was done, they went back to class. It wasn't a problem at all. And so, we were greatly relieved, I suppose, but we also trusted that the kids could do that. And we explained to them and we praised them when they could do that. So to say that we're not going to try it because this will happen, you've got to sort of trust your instinct with a lot of that stuff. But I suppose you also have to be open to the idea that that could work. And if you're not, it's not going to work. So there's a mindset shift there too. But, not everyone loves toys like I do. So how do you say to people, get into the play side of things. It's very therapeutic. Look at some of that stuff and do it yourself. You don't have to be the one that because you're the leader in the school, you don't have to be the one that's controlled and always in charge and always emotionally sort of calm, although that helps. But, you don't always have to be the one that's not having the fun. And the kids enjoy it when you are part of the team too. They really want to know that you're part of the team too. So, yeah, I think it is a big mind shift though. It is.
Just hearing you talk, I mean, one of the things I think that you've done at the school is that the principal's office goes from this, fearful, looming kind of, place that you go to when you're in trouble to a place of sort of safety and regulation and that kids kind of use when they need to. And just hearing you speak, I reflected on how sometimes I've heard kids say, I'll go up to the principal's office. I'm not scared of her, I'll take it on. And it's almost as though, they're saying there's this looming kind of thing that's hanging over my head. And actually, even though it's unpleasant, me just facing up to it and having some sort of control over it or coercion over it, brings me some level of safety. So they are mucking up anyway to get there, to get that. But,
sure.
But you're changing the dynamic of how they're getting there.
Yeah, and some kids will do that. I mean, some kids know that if they do a certain thing, then that might happen. But, you can talk to a child about that. Yeah. Like, strategies we used was you know, some kids that found it really hard to settle in the morning, I would pick them up first thing in the morning and say, come to my office and we're going to talk about how the day looks for you. So we would have a little template and we would go through what the steps were for the day, how the day was going to look, what you could hope to achieve in that time, and where the little bits were that you might have some say in you know, what you want to do. And that was accepted across the school. I could set that up. Then I would walk back with the child to the teacher and say, this is what we've determined today. And at these points, this is going to happen. And I'll make sure so-and-so knows about that so that, you know, that'll be good for that. And this is when you're going to come and see me and I'll make sure I'm there then. So having that conversation and building that trust, you know, it's a bit time consuming initially, but getting to know kids like that is very fulfilling in a school sense. And very productive, I'd have to say, because you can diffuse situations really quickly when kids know that they can trust you and that you're going to be fair and you're going to stick to your word, which is really, really important. And there, you know, and there would be, in our little school, there were a number of people who were paramount to that working, not just classroom teachers. So we had school counsellor, which we fought long and hard to have and retain in our school, which we were very fortunate with, and she had good relationships with the kids. We had a senior teacher wellbeing who worked from the therapy room that we had, that we were fortunate enough to build. It sounds wonderful, but you know, there was a lot of negotiation and discussion around this, and we started off with a very substandard school. And there was an assistant principal, there was, you know, an Aboriginal liaison person, there was a maintenance officer who the kids absolutely loved, and there was our, you know, our bookkeeper, or our business manager, who the kids absolutely loved too. Now, they all had toys as well, and they knew they had a relationship with the kids. And so there were these key people around the school that also connected with the kids. It wasn't just the principal or the assistant principal or the teacher. So building that capacity for the kids to be able to interact with a broader group of people. And they, you know, people would say, well, they'd play them off against each other and do that. Some of them may have, but it didn't happen a lot. And kids understood that, you know, that these things they were allowed to do, and they got quite possessive about it. And they would say, come and tell me if some kid was, you know, not doing the right thing with that little bit of time they had or something. They would come and say, so-and-so was supposed to be doing that and he's not doing that, you know. And so then, so the children started to, or the students started to police some of that stuff and had a say over it, which was very, very powerful, you know, because there used to be we used to have a rule that there was no chasing on the playground. And it was my rule, you know. I would stand up at the muster we'd have in the mornings and I'd say, and remember, what does Miss Lizzie say? And they'd all go, no chasing. Why don't we have chasing? Because a lot of people would ask, why don't you have chasing? And I would say, we don't have chasing because when you play chasing, people get upset and then people get angry and then people start getting really cranky with each other and it just doesn't work. So no chasing. So the kids would come running up to me at recess or lunch and they'd say, oh, so-and-so's playing chasing this. Well, we better go and see about that. And I remember when I left the school, they gave me this T-shirt that says no chasing. And it's quite funny, you know, that Donna sometimes rings me up and says, maybe you should come back and do yard duty and wear your no chasey T-shirt because, you know, there's chasey going on. So, yeah.
I just wanted to say about that, Liz, I mean, I just want to mention this in case I don't get a chance, because one of the things that really is striking about what you're describing is that not only are you the principal, but you're a leader in like that relational pedagogy, you know, in the way you kind of talk to kids, and you're modeling that to the, not just to the kids, the families, but also to the staff, I think, which gives them permission and a kind of a model to do it off of. But I wanted to kind of chat to you because there are times where you are setting limits. There are times where you are, offering suspensions and things like that. But it's coming at the back of all this relationship building. Can you talk to that a little bit in terms of how you offer that and how they come back into the school?
Yeah, so we do suspend kids, and we don't do it easily. But if behaviour is threatening safety of students and safety of other kids, and some of our students, would get very angry, and we would say, you need some calming time, we need to take you home, we need to talk to mum and dad, maybe you can spend a day at home tomorrow, and then you're welcome back. So it wouldn't be such a big deal. We'd write the suspensions up in the normal way. We would write all the behaviours up. We used an SWPBS methodology for collecting the behaviour data. That was the only thing we really used SWPBS for, because it was a very useful tool for us to watch our behaviour go down, which it did significantly over the years. So we would talk to the child about that, or we would just say, come on, mate, you've done this and you've done this and you've done this, and students aren't feeling safe now. They don't feel safe because you're not, being safe in the classroom. The teacher's feeling worried now because you're not being safe. We need to take you home. So we'd take them home. I mean, we had some incidents that, as schools do, that were pretty over the top, really, and we would suspend a child for a length of time over that. But we would take the child home, we would talk to the family, we would explain why, and I mean, sometimes families weren't very happy about that, but we would explain why. We would invite the family to come back to the school when the child re-entered and sit with the child if they wished to. We would try and make it very, available for parents to do that. Some did more than others, but most of them felt, a little bit sort of unsettled in a school environment. And it was a bit of a shame job for them if the child misbehaved. So they were, you had to be very careful about that. But when the child returned, we welcomed the child back. So we didn't revisit the incident. So often you get a re-entry meeting. And I have a little bit of problem with re-entry meetings. I know it's a good place to start from again, fresh start, all the rest of it. But it's not really a fresh start when you're sitting there with the child and going over what happened. And often with our kids, that would then escalate the problem again, and in their head they would have that problem again. And they would be angry with you because they didn't want you to talk about it again. That had been done, it had been finished with. They didn't want you now sitting there and telling them about that again, because that made them feel angry. Because, they don't like to behave like that, a lot of our kids. And we need to understand that they want to be as normal and, as functional as any other kid in the school. And so when you start telling them about things that they did, that they feel a bit shame about, and they probably wish they hadn't done it, then it's just counterproductive. So it's better to say, you're welcome back, it's really good to see you. Sometimes we'd say, is there anyone you need to fix it with? So the consistent language that we developed around the school was quite simplified. And that was a big body of work we did. So everything was very consistent. Everyone used the same language. There was signage up everywhere. So we would say things like, one of the charts we did was one like this. And I don't know if you can see that, but it had very simple language on it. And this was sort of from the SWPBS idea, but we wanted it simple, and we wanted our students to have had a say in it. So to say, now you have to fix this. Who do you need to fix it with? And they would be quite open about who they needed to fix it with. And so you would teach them. I would go with them and I would say, do you want to do this with me first, so you know what to say, so you don't feel, shame job in front of them. So we would go through it, and they would go and they would say it. And our staff were beautiful in accepting that, because you would often stand there and think, please accept this apology, because it's very heartfelt and it's going to make a big difference. And the staff would never let me down. So it was always a fantastic thing for me that you could stand there with a little kid and I'd go, I'm really sorry that I threw that rock and smashed that window in the classroom the other day, and I'm sorry. I would just say something like that. The teacher would say, yes, it was, it made me feel a bit sad and worried, but look, it's fine now. We can, you're welcome back in the classroom. Everyone's here. And sometimes they would even say sorry to the class, which was really huge for our kids. So, yeah. So I think that, that empathy, which it's a fine line sometimes, that, balancing it and keeping everyone feeling that they're feeling safe. The staff especially was always a big concern of mine, that we would always check in and make sure that they were okay with it, touch base at the end of the day. So, it was a constant balancing act in a way with that. But for children to be able to say that, I need to fix it now. And our kids would start to say, after a couple of years, it was common for them to come and say, okay, I'm sorry I did that, miss, and now I need to fix it. And so they would be able to fix it. And we would say things like, you have to use your kind words and, your kind voices. And so they would talk in language like that. So it was a real learning for them about how to respond.
Wow, that's really great. I'm just mindful of the time. Liz, thank you so much. I'll just throw it to Kay if she's got any final questions or comments about this episode.
No, I don't think I have actually. Other than to say it's wonderful to hear it, recounted in action, that there's positives there, because so often we hear what other schools do, and the natural default is, yes, well, how would that work here? But it's not about the building or the resources, what we've talked about. It's about the staff's attitude and giving the child voice in their education, and starting with that, regardless of the resources around you. It's about the people.
Absolutely. Yeah, it sure is.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you, Liz. We've got the next episode where we will talk about the teachers, your staff, and how you build a cohesive group that have got your back, like in the story you just told us. So we'll explore that in the next episode. So thank you very much, Liz. Thanks, Kay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Trauma-Informed Education. My name is Dr. Govind Krishnamurthy, and I'm here with Dr. Kay Eyre. Hi, Kay.
Hi, Govind.
So we're in our second episode with Liz, the principal from Sadadeen State School. Hi, Liz. Thank you for doing this.
Hello, Govind. Hello, Kay.
Hi.
So this episode, we're focusing on the teachers and the staffing group. So if you haven't listened to our first episode, we discussed how we think about students and their needs and the role of the principal in terms of leading trauma-informed practice. So if you haven't listened to it, do go back and check that out. So today we're talking about teachers, Liz, and staff, and the cohesion among staff groups. You talked about safety a lot in the last episode when it comes to students. How do you think about safety and care when it comes to teachers? And I'd be curious to hear how you kind of induct teachers into the school and trauma-informed practice. What does that look like?
Well, it's the ultimate focus, really, isn't it? You want your staff to be safe. You want them to be happy in the workplace, like students. You want them to feel valued, and you want them to feel very much part of the team. So when I first arrived at Sadadeen, it was quite a divided school. And I spent probably 6 months just building relationships with staff. So role modelling to staff, the way I wanted them to interact with each other and the way I wanted them to interact with me. I really enjoy people, so I really enjoyed looking for ways to connect with staff. Some of them were a little bit more difficult than other people, and finding ways through that. So I guess as a leader, having that emotional intelligence to look for ways through, because it was very important to me that we had a cohesive team. So, you know, working out strategies to do that. Once we had a level of trust with each other, we then had to take the next step, and we'd all decided that we needed to do something different in the school because it wasn't working, and we weren't going to get anywhere if we just continued the same practices we'd been doing, where there was a lot of disruptive behaviour and people didn't feel safe at all. So with a little bit of thought and persuasion, we decided the trauma-informed practice, the research that we'd read around some of that, was a really good way to go, because it had an understanding of complex childhood trauma, which we believe was very impactful on our kids' lives and therefore impactful on our staff. We were lucky that Joe Tucci happened to be coming to town, and the whole staff got PD'd in that space. And that was the start of our journey, where people walked away from that PD going, okay, so that's why this happens. And if I do this, then I'm just making it worse, aren't I? And I'm making it worse for myself. Yes, you know, it was sort of like a light going on. So we built on that. So then we talked to staff around that. They all had some ownership of it because we'd done it together. And we vowed then that all the PD we were going to do in the school, everyone was going to be part of it. Support staff, teaching staff, front office staff, bus drivers, everybody was going to be part of that, because we all needed to be in the conversation. So everyone had to have a voice. And from that, we developed plans and strategies for working in the classroom to make sure that teachers felt safe. So, you know, we strategized around what would happen if this occurred. How would that look? How would we react? Who would be first responder? Who would, you know, right down to, I'll step in and take your class, and if I'm not here, so-and-so will do it. You go and have a cup of tea. You need to debrief with so-and-so if that happens. And then we'll, you know, when you feel that you're resilient enough to go back into the classroom, then, and you know, it had teething problems. There were some people that needed more of that support than others. Some people were more trusting than others. We had a lot of staff meetings around how that looked, and we had to persist with those. So we had to be patient. We had to have many conversations over and over again. We couldn't just go, oh, for God's sake, we've had that conversation, move on. You know, it was that whole kindness and non-punitive thing that we had to model to our staff as well. And when we did that, then the staff started modelling it to each other. So everyone would listen and everyone would have an opinion. And sometimes we had to change things, but we were flexible in that. And sometimes people said, we feel really frightened when that happens. And, you know, for me, that was a real signal. That whole fear thing in front of kids, if, you know, if teachers feel that, then that's very sort of powerful, and it's very hard to keep control of your class if you're feeling that fear. So talking around strategies, I mean, we did a lot of PD. Kay and Govind, you were both involved in a lot of the PD we did in the school as a whole school, and talked about strategies and ways for dealing with that. So we had to be very clear on our processes. We had to be very clear on the roles of the different people in that space, and we had to be very clear on how we looked after the well-being of staff. So the debriefing was very important. The school counsellor that we had on board, we used a lot for that. we would never let a staff member leave the school if something had happened during the day that we knew made them upset. So we were very aware of what might upset our staff and what we might need to do to step in and you know, just have a chat. It didn't have to be long, but it did have to be an acknowledgement. And the whole idea of being very present in the school was important. So the leadership team would be very prominent in and out of classrooms. People got very used to us being in and out of their classrooms, talking to them, talking to kids. If we knew that a child might have come to school and looked a little bit unsettled, we might hover in that classroom, we might sit alongside the child, we might take them for a walk. But we'd always let the teacher know that this might happen, and if they felt a bit uncomfortable, just to call out, and we would come and help out with that. So we were very much in the, you know, in the time of while the school was running, we were very prominent in those spaces. And I think it really helped staff to know that we had their back and that we weren't going to be judgmental to them about that. That was really important too. So we talk about being non-punitive with students. Hey, how about being non-punitive with staff? You know, like I always used to say to staff, we don't know what's going on in people's lives. They don't always tell us. So there might be something really horrible that someone's come to school with today. There might have been a death in the family. There might have been a cancer diagnosis from someone really close. We don't know that. And they come into school and pretend to be, oh yeah, everything's fine. And then they start to fall to bits. So if you're always kind to someone, then you never have to go and say sorry. And it's always going to help them through the day. So just having that sort of way of dealing with things and talking in that sort of way, I think really helped build staff. So we had a really kind staff.
I was going to ask Liz, you know, I can imagine that there's all the stuff, there might be some staff who are reluctant participants on the journey. We were talking before about how for some staff to feel safe, they need to feel like the leader is, you know, acting with some authority and enforcing kind of limits and punitive sort of measures, because if you're not, it feels kind of permissive. It doesn't feel safe. It feels like the kids are being let to get away with things. How did you manage those conversations, you know, when staff did feel as though, you know, it was too permissive? What was that like for you?
Yeah, I think you had to know when to make the call. So you did have to be authoritative. You did, in a way, you had to be, you had to give the sense that you were very much in charge. So that calmness, that that thing that you didn't really get flapped easily by those things. You didn't sort of go, oh my God, what are we going to do? You know, that you were in control. So I guess that was something that we talked about as a leadership team. And you might pick your person who would go and deal with something. So if it was a physical thing, you often had, we had support staff in every classroom, and they sort of knew the kids, and a lot of them were young males who were quite good at diffusing things, so to speak. And we were also very good at diffusing things. So that calm sort of, if there was something going on and I realised that staff were getting quite agitated, I could quite calmly walk in and go up and say, how about I take the class for the next 20 minutes and you go and have a cup of tea? Go and find Donna. Or I'd take Donna with me, or Ali, and say, come with me. We're going to step in here. You want to take the class? I'll go and have a chat. So, and then sort of being aware that you didn't want to do it in a way that caused an embarrassment, I suppose, because teachers are very much, you know, they take great pride in what they do. And if they lose control of a classroom, you don't want to make it really obvious that that you think that they're not coping. So you have to do it quite subtly, I think, and you have to know your staff quite well, and they have to know that you're not coming in there to give them a hard time. If they got that sense, then it would be very unprofessional. So I think that relationship stuff and that trust, And then having these systems set up so that they know, if I stepped in there, someone's told me, like one of the support staff, that things aren't going well, or you've sent a card, I'll come in, you'll quietly exit out, there's no loss of face, there's no shame job, you'll go and calm down, I'll read the situation, that child might have to go home for a little bit of time because it's not safe, you know, and then we would sort of get everyone back to feeling okay. And you would touch base with the staff later on at the end of the day and say, how did that go? How did you feel? What else could we have done? Did you, you know, what do we need to do with this child? Sometimes they would say, get them out of my class. And you go, okay, well, we could, you know, maybe tomorrow we could swap them around for a bit. And so you had to sort of really be open and listen to their solutions too, and hope that that would get them through. But, you know, everyone's different, and some people needed a lot more of that support and encouragement. I think most people said they felt very supported, which was good. And we'd often have little opportunities for staff to say that they needed more support or they didn't feel supported. Some people are better at that than others. You know, the bigger your staff, I suppose, the harder it is for you to get around and manage that. But, you know, you've got to have eyes on it all the time, and you've got to have a sense of it. So sitting in my office wouldn't have worked for me, because I wouldn't have known about any of this, and I would have just dealt with the fallout.
I was just going to...
Not a good style.
Yeah. I'm going to throw to Kay in a bit, but I was just going to ask about that, Liz. You know, it feels like you have a very visible presence in the school, and I can imagine people who work in bigger schools or, you know, other leaders kind of going, I just don't have time for that. You know, I've got 1,000 other things I need to be doing. This is the reason why I have a team of deputies or whatever. You know, this is their job to do it. Yeah. How do you think about how you spend your time, and also about how you build up that leadership team around you, do you think?
Well, you've got to have the vision for a start, and you've got to share that. You know, that's got to be a shared thing in the school. So, you know, you have to have developed with your staff what you want your school to feel like and look like and sound like. And when you've got that, then you've got to put the protocols and the policies in place that enable that to happen with staff. You also have to have a very sharp and narrow focus. So our focus was in the trauma-informed space. We wanted to make our school safe. We wanted to make it a place where kids came and felt valued. We wanted our staff to feel safe, and we wanted our kids then to be able to learn, because they wouldn't be able to learn if they were in a space that was very disruptive. So that was our real focus. There were lots of other things thrown at us. To be able to have the ability to say, I'm not going to do that, I'm not going to do that, I'm pushing back on that, and being quite upfront about it with the regional directors or whatever, that no, our school's not going to be part of that. You know, it takes a little bit of courage. You're often, you know, sort of regarded a little bit differently, I suppose, because you're not doing what everyone else is doing, but it pays dividends in the end. And I think that it's your school, and as a principal, you have a lot of autonomy in your school. And with your staff, you have to decide how that school's going to look and run. And then you have to be, as a leader, the one who pushes back and gives people the space to actually do that. So you do have to be brave, and you do have to be bold. And, you know, if you've got a career pathway in front of you, you might want to think about just how brave and bold you're going to be. But, you know, you had a little mantra occasionally that would say, I don't think they'll fire me. Do you?
I think that is the boldness, isn't it? That, thinking about the worst case scenario. And I think I've said this to you before, Liz, and it's such a parallel to the kids who are afraid themselves, and then the staff who are nervous about looking incompetent or getting hurt. You know, and part of that, what we're requiring of all of them is to have courage and, you know, risk being vulnerable and to trust that the school is safe. I'll just chuck it over to Kay just to see if she had any questions or comments.
Yeah, no, just following on that, Govind, I think it's once you do some professional learning in trauma-informed practice, I think there's a point in time after you've done, you know, sort of immersed yourself in it and you're starting to work in a culture where you're seeing it actually happen in front of you, that it occurs to you that, oh, the same applies to me. You know,
Absolutely.
like you separate yourself from, this is the teachers and this is the children, this is their needs, and that's what I'm all about, because teachers notoriously, like many professionals, put themselves second. And then it occurs to you that, oh, that's the same. Same with leadership. Like as Liz was talking, I felt that the whole foundation of her being, you know, such a good leader is that she was attuned to the needs of her staff. Just like we tell teachers, you need to be attuned. How do you do that? You need to be present. You need to listen, you know, and all of that stuff. It's exactly the same. Grown-ups need it too, you know, but I think we tend to, for quite some time, still separate ourselves from those, from having needs and additional rights and all of those things, because we're all very different as teachers, from what we're providing for the children. And it's not that difficult if you think of it as people need these things, you know. Yeah, so no, thank you.
And if you think of it as a team too, that look, we're all in this together. We're all trying to make a difference here. And so we need all our voices to be heard in this. So we can't just have one person with the vision saying, this is how it's going to be, and you're all going to do this. It's not a good way to operate from my point of view. You know, I would rather have people saying, okay, we heard what you said. We don't agree with it. Can you explain? Okay, so what if we did it this way? And you then have to be flexible and say, yeah, look, why not? Why don't we try that? I used to say to staff, put your ideas up. No idea is a bad idea until it's a bad idea. Let's give it a go. And if it doesn't work, we'll try something else. But we've got to try different things. And you're all part of this. And, you know, it's that IQ stuff. So me by myself, IQ, everyone together, it's huge. So we can solve enormous problems as a team with everyone on board believing in what we're doing, because they have a voice in it too, not just because they're being told to do it. And so you do have to listen to the disgruntled ones, and you do have to find a way to bring everyone on board, and there has to be a lot of consensus happening. So you do have to be really in that mix and seeing it as something that's really interesting, but you've got to be able to direct it too in a way that you know is going to work. So you've got to have that vision tucked firmly in your head, and you've got to be very, very determined that everyone's going to understand what you're saying, so that they're going to want to come on the journey too.
Yeah. Liz, I was curious about the culture at the school in terms of how teachers kind of interact with each other. I think if you talk to principals, they say they spend a lot of time working out things that are happening between teachers. I was wondering about, you know, what you did at the school and what trauma-informed practice kind of offers in terms of building cohesion. And I'll just give you a heads up. I think you were saying something about sick leave once, which was quite a nice example of cohesion. So could you speak to that in terms of?
Yeah. I guess when the trauma-informed practice stuff helped us shift our mindset to non-punitive, and around that came this element of kindness to yourself and to people around you. And it's a very simple concept, kindness, in a way, and one that's often disregarded, and it's just a word, you know, but it's a very effective thing, kindness. So if you're kind to people around you, then they in turn are going to be kind back to you, and they're going to be kind to others too. And that kindness can extend to understanding where staff are at in their personal lives to some extent, and being able to say to them, I've got a relief teacher I can get tomorrow. I know that you're doing it pretty hard at the moment. Why don't you have a day? And, you know, those sorts of little strategies. And, you know, when people come to you because they have a wedding, a very good friend's getting married and stuff, you know, often managing those situations in schools with staffing really gets to people in leadership roles. And they are more inclined to go, no, you know, you can't do that. Whereas we tended to look really hard to find ways where we could compromise that and try and support our staff where they needed to have that support, which really paid dividends in the end, because as the school became kinder and happier, people wanted to be there. And it was a lot of fun. And I know it was hard, and it still is hard. It's a very hard place to work. But there is an element of we're all in this together, and there is an element that you get supported and heard. And so it's not such a bad job. And I think it's really important in schools that staff feel that they are part of a team and that their voices are heard, and that, you know, that people in leadership roles are sort of open to them learning and them changing and meeting the needs of people as that goes along. So yeah, it's a very demanding role, but a really fun one too.
Yeah, and I will say, you know, it's incredible that you've been able to have such little turnover really in your staffing.
Very little turnover for such a difficult school that had a lot of turnover. Very little turnover of staff. In fact, recruitment, you know, I used to do, I remember in a previous school I worked in, we would probably be looking at 9 or 10 staff a year just through attrition. It was a big school, but, you know, maternity leave and all sorts of things like that. We've just been so lucky that that's not an issue for us. And when we do need a staff member, someone pops up, like the lady from Sydney I was telling you about, who heard about our little school and decided, I want to work there, and rang up and said, I'm interested in working in your school, and came to Alice Springs and visited us and had a look around. You know, we're quite honest with staff when they come to look at our school, and, you know, that's always a tricky one. You have to be honest, but you don't want to sort of make it sound negative. But people are always really interested. I think teachers are amazing people because they're often very curious, and they often like a challenge, and they like a good idea. And, you know, teachers love the idea of being kind to kids and getting kids alongside and learning. And I think we tick a lot of those boxes for people in that little school.
Yeah, I think one of the things that, having worked in that child protection kind of area, one of the remarkable things, I think, which is almost like a gift you can give to people, is protecting the compassion and good intentions that they come into the work with. You know, having things to be able to protect that, I think, is such a gift, because I think with things like burnout and vicarious trauma and things like that, it's the, you know, in some ways it's the erosion of that. I was curious, Liz, when you see that, you know, in teachers, and you might have seen it in some teachers, where you're starting to see that negativity, that little bit of burnout, how do you kind of approach it? Is it just about touching base with them and checking in on how they're going, or was there anything else that you did?
Well, we had a lot of success in that space, really, because when you start talking to teachers, touching base with them certainly, but recognising that they might be feeling a bit burnt out, but also a bit sort of unhappy in the situation they're in, making a few suggestions like, what would you really like to do? What are your interests really? You know, where do they really sit? What about a change? If you were able to change in the school, what would you do? I mean, they can't say principal, obviously, but they could. But often teachers would, you know, really self-reflect and go, you know, I'd really like to have a go at doing the PE job, or I'd really like to have a go at doing non-contact time with music or drama, because I've always loved that, and I'd like to try something different. Or I'd love to do, you know, social emotional learning And so you can have those conversations, and often you can make a change for them, which is very productive. So, you know, looking at staff, at the strengths that they bring and the skills that they bring, and seeing if you can't sort of change it up a bit for them or give them a different focus, and that often reinvigorates them enough to make them want to stay and feel very valued again, and bring a different focus in the school.
Oh, that's great. I'll throw it over to Kay for any final comments, but I was struck by how you said, you know, in the first episode about things being student-led, but I think here you're describing how things can be staff-led as well in terms of their needs and interests, which gives them some sense of autonomy, I suppose, in the environment they're working in, if they're feeling a bit kind of run down as well. So yeah,
we had some great programs result from that, like Rock and Water, and some of those, you know, therapeutic programs, drumming and stuff, where staff went and did extra PD and then came back and brought their skills and started these programs up in the school. Yeah, that's very valuable.
Oh, that's great. Kay, did you have any final comments or thoughts?
Just a quick one, following on what Liz just said. In my experience as a classroom teacher, my own experience, I would have those ideas all the time in my head, working in a school. Nobody ever asked me. Nobody physically came to my door and said, hey, what about, or do you have? I remember the only way I thought I could tell a principal, regardless of what school I was in, what even year level I wanted to teach the following year, was filling out the form with the preferences, and then you got back, this is what you're teaching. And the underlying process of that was, depends who the teachers were, whether they got their first preference or not, because there was an underlying rule about how they were processed and what was taken notice of and what wasn't. But just that simple fact that you like the kids, that somebody says, what do you think? And you actually get to say it out loud. You know, it sounds really simple, but it's, especially in a really big school, I guess, it may be more difficult, you know, but just asking.
But most good ideas are pretty simple, aren't they, Kate?
They are, yeah, just that opportunity, you know.
Yeah.
May not have any, but it's about being given the opportunity, yeah.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
being heard.
Thank you.
Yeah, being heard, yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much, Liz. That was really useful. Lots of practical examples. Really appreciate your time. We've got one other episode in this series focusing on the leader themselves and their kind of relationship with the community and the school community. So we look forward to speaking to you then. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Trauma-Informed Education. My name is Dr. Gavin Krishnamurthy, and I'm here as always with Dr. Kay Eyre. Hi, Kay.
Hi, Gavin. How are you today?
Good, thank you. And we're joined today with by Liz. Hi, Liz. How are you?
Hi, Gavin. Hi, Kay.
Hello.
Liz, thank you for joining us. This is our last episode where we're going to focus on the leader themselves and the tasks of building a community and building relationships with people in the school community and outside as well. If you are tuning in to this episode, I'd encourage you to go back and listen to our first two episodes where we talked about how trauma-informed leadership can help in terms of students and staff. So I would strongly encourage you to go back and listen to it. Lots of really great tips and stories in those ones. So Liz, I wanted to start with a question we usually ask our guests right when we talk to them the first time, which is that because this podcast is for educators, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your experience in school, going to school yourself, and how it kind of influenced the work you ended up doing.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in a small country town in New Zealand, My parents were Dutch migrants, the very first to be in that very small town in New Zealand. So it was about 900 people right at the bottom of the South Island, very cold. I didn't know that then until I went to the Northern Territory, but I really loved school. Initially, I didn't like school. Before we moved to this small country town, I started school in Canterbury, and I really didn't enjoy it because even though we were white, we were still different because we were a migrant family. And my brother and I, our parents were still very strong Dutch speakers. And so there was a difference, and the kids picked up really quickly on that difference. And I felt quite alienated, I suppose. And I still know that feeling from a 5-year-old me. And I think it set me up to be a bit of a sort of person who looked out for others. So it gave me that sense that you needed to accept difference, and you needed to champion it. And I made a real art form of it as I got older. I used to do a lot of sewing and making my own clothes because our family weren't very well off. We lived, there were 6 kids in our family, and we lived pretty much subsistence. So money was a bit of an issue. But I used to get old clothes and make new ones out of them. My mother was a very clever seamstress, and she taught me how to sew. And I used to wear these absolutely outrageous outfits to church every Sunday, just to give someone or people something to talk about. So I really embraced that idea of difference. And my father was very good at supporting that, I suppose. He really engaged with people very strongly, and he loved people around. Our house was a busy place with lots of visitors and things. So we always had that real expectation that people looked out for people. There was a sense of community, and that difference was respected and regarded. So I took that into school. I was the eldest sister of 4 younger siblings, and an older brother who always said I was real bossy anyway, so he was always scared of me. And I used to make my siblings go to school. So from quite an early age, I'd converted this old shed and got some desks from school, and I was the school teacher. And my brother Peter still maintains that I probably taught him his maths really well. So I always had this idea of being in charge of people. And we used to do concert parties, and I'd always wanted to be a performer. I'd always wanted to dance, and I could never do that. So being in that sense, looking after other kids, and that I could help them do that. So that was always very much in my mind. And while I really enjoyed school, I also saw I was also a bit of a ratbag, I suppose. I always championed the underdog, and I didn't like being told what to do if I didn't think it was fair. I had a real sense of fairness, so I was a bit rebellious in that regard. Probably a little bit of a ratbag, but I always got away with it. So I learnt the skills of negotiation quite early, which I think was really important. I went to university and studied home science, which then was a science subject. So we did psychology and we did food technology, and it was a great subject. And so when I finished uni, I went to Teachers College, but I didn't want to teach. I just wanted it to go travelling with. And I worked in the rag trade, and I worked in kitchens, and I did all manner of things until I got to the Northern Territory and was offered a teaching job, although I did teach in a few schools in New Zealand. And I was offered art, and I went, yes, I'll take it. So that was Darwin, and then moved into Alice Springs later on, and into some adult education. And then once I'd had my 4 children, I then moved back into a primary school. So I was secondary trained. So I did the whole not really. But coming to Alice Springs was a very interesting thing for me to do. I mean, Darwin, when I first landed in Darwin in 1980, 81, it was like freedom for me, because it was so sort of, you know, Darwin in 1981, you could do anything. People were very welcoming. Nobody really cared what you wore or what you said or where you were from. It was very, very liberating. And I sort of fell in love with the Northern Territory, and then, of course, my partner. But moving to Alice Springs, the first job I got there was running the Women's Refuge. And that was very interesting for me, because I got to know a lot of Aboriginal women and a lot of Aboriginal people, and saw a whole different side of Alice Springs. So I've lived in Alice Springs for 35 years, and I have a lot of friends who are Aboriginal, and I've had the, I suppose, the wonderful opportunity to move in and out of Aboriginal communities and get to know Aboriginal people. I'm very interested in the whole opportunity that being in a place where there is such rich culture offers. And while I'm very much a white fella, and I, you know, feel that sometimes, I think we're very, very privileged to be able to live in a time and a place where, you know, having a bit of knowledge and understanding, or being able to listen to Aboriginal people and their stories is really, really valuable. So I suppose I brought that into my teaching. When I work with kids, I really love working with kids. It gives me a lot of inspiration and a lot of energy. I really enjoy listening to their ideas and their thoughts, and I love a great idea. And so, you know, the opportunity to let kids explore things and do things differently is really fun. And so I pushed the envelope a little bit, and worked in spaces where you know, if you're enthusiastic enough and prepared to do enough organisation around stuff, you can create things in schools that can be a lot of fun. You know, science fairs, all sorts of art exhibitions, all sorts of things like that. And I suppose I had a lot of energy for that sort of stuff. And kids come on board really readily when they feel that you're passionate about something, that you're interested in them, and that, you know, that you're fair. Once again, when I worked in schools, I always championed the underdog. Excuse me. So those kids with high needs, those kids with disabilities, I always wanted to find a way to connect with them better. Excuse me, I'm just going to have a drink.
Yeah.
And so finding ways to work better with kids and role modelling those ways in schools became a part of the way I operated. I always believed that schools should be places of great learning and discovery, not places of lots of rules and tedious stuff like that. And so I, you know, tried to put my stamp on that whenever I could. And the power of yes was always very prominent in what I did. Yeah. So being able to say yes to things and then figuring it out afterwards was always something that I loved.
I'll just give you a chance to take another drink.
Too much talking.
That's right. Just while you're drinking, Liz, one of the things that's really struck me just from the last two episodes particularly is how you've really illustrated all those sort of key principles of trauma-informed practice, you know, the trust, the transparency, the collaboration, and providing choice and empowerment, how that works from the student to the, you know, to the teachers. What has your journey been? I mean, we're talking about your own like leadership values and growth here. What was your journey to arrive to that? I mean, it sounded like you have a lot of life experiences where, you know, clearly those things were of value, and you saw, you know, you saw the importance of them. But from a leadership and schooling point of view, what was your sort of journey to arrive at that? Because there's a lot of competing demands here and people who want other things from you. What was that like for you to land at those?
Well, I suppose I always thought that, you know, that idea that behaviour communicates a need. I think that's always driven a lot of my thinking around working with kids in a school. So, you know, the idea that you blame kids for something they're doing was always a little bit interesting to me and didn't seem quite fair. So wanting to understand more about that, I really worked a lot through the arts, I suppose. So the arts was a real driver for me, the creative arts. And I always thought that kids learning things through using creative ways of doing it through the creative arts was a really powerful tool. And, you know, Ken Robinson was very influential for me in a lot of that early work that he did. And many have followed on from that. And I did a lot of reading on the power of music, the power of dance, the power of the visual arts and kids expressing themselves. And I guess that took me to that point that learning doesn't always have to be about maths and English, that there's an integrated way of doing this learning that could be very useful to a lot of kids. That I guess Ali Hood was very, she was a teacher at Sadadeen. I've talked with Ali for years and years and years, really. We've always intersected our paths. And she's a very like-minded person. And she introduced me to a few ideas. Bessel van der Kolk was a book she threw at me very early in the piece. And that was transformative for me, reading that. I'd heard about, you know, PTSD, and my partner worked with vet affairs a lot, and he talked about the trauma side. But when I read that, I really could relate that to a lot of the children that we worked with. And look, some of the staff too, you know, and people in this town. So when I started looking at Sadadeen School and getting to know some of the families and people who lived in town camps, and now a lot of people in Alice Springs have never set foot inside a town camp, although there are 28 town camps in and around the town. And they're very interesting places. They can be a bit distressing. You know, the living conditions in them are sometimes not so good. And visiting our kids in those places, in the town camps and some of the public housing areas, I realised how disadvantaged many of our families and children were. And it just didn't feel quite right. And the little school, Sadadeen, had a very high percentage of Aboriginal kids, up to 92, 93%. There were 14 language groups represented in that space. And to me, that was intriguing. You know, some of our kids cannot read and write English, but they speak 3 or 4 other languages. And, you know, it's pretty fascinating to see and to question education, how we offer it, and look at that bigger picture and think, what are we missing here? You know, when there are people who have this very old culture, who have survived in a very harsh environment, very significant stories and understanding of country, and yet how do we capture that in what we do, and how do we make it equitable? And to me, it has never really felt equitable in that space for many kids, you know, not just Aboriginal kids, but for some kids it just doesn't feel equitable at all. So trying to get that understanding, realising that to make the school successful, we needed parents to believe that the school was worthwhile. And to do that, we needed to make it a friendly place. And really, at the end of the day, you know, I've got a couple of very heartfelt letters written to me by Aboriginal families who have said very simple things like, we like our kids to come to the school because you are friendly and kind at Sadadeen School. Friendly and kind. Now, it's not hard when you think to be friendly and kind. And I've often thought that while this little town values what Aboriginal people bring to it in a sense of economy, while they probably don't even understand the extent of it, they don't value Aboriginal people who, you know, sort of are very important to this part of the world. And so when you see Aboriginal people walking in a group, many people don't even greet them, don't say hello. You know, if you said hello to someone, then they'll say hello back, and then there's a connection. So you get that sense that there's very much them and us, and I think our students really feel that. And part of me really wanted not to have that sense that there's them and us, and looking for ways to try and make that work in the sense of a school or a community space where, you know, there's more two-way communication going on, there's more willingness to listen, willingness to share, a lack of judgment, not being judgmental about people, trying to put yourself in a different perspective and see it differently, trying to understand things like what we've got and how much you need to live a good life. I mean, they're very philosophical thoughts and questions, and that whole ethical question around education, public education, and trying to achieve the best outcomes for our families and kids. So that ethics question's a really strong one for me, I suppose.
Yeah. I'll throw it over to Kay in a minute just to hear her thoughts. But I think we've had chats about kindness. I think, Liz, it's how it's both like a simple but difficult thing. And as you were talking, I was reflecting on how one of the challenges is about persisting with compassion and kindness, even in the face of, you know, people who are not necessarily acting towards you in that way.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Did you, I mean, and it sounds like there are a lot of things that you do for the staff and for the students. How do you maintain that? You know, when you you know, you've had children who are not necessarily, you know, receptive to your, you know, kindness or offers of safety, families who are, you know, quite, you know, acting unsafe. How do you maintain that for yourself in terms of holding that kind and compassionate position?
Well, I suppose I like to laugh a lot. I like to make jokes about things, often at other people's expenses sometimes. But having a team of people that you can really share stuff with is very important. And at the end of every day, we would sit down and we would have a bit of a debrief. And sometimes that would involve, you know, oh my God, you know, that was, but we would sort of let it go. And when I started working at the Women's Refuge, I learned a really good skill. And that was when I walked out of the door of the refuge, I left it behind and I went home. And my other life was a very rich life. So to have another life is really important. And so you put that one aside and then you step into this other life, which, you know, is your friends and your family and the things you love to do and all that sort of stuff. But the trauma-informed information and knowledge that I learned from you guys and from Joe Tucci and from a lot of research that I've read and a lot of people that I've talked to, and there is much information on it now, has really enabled me to be able to put some of those issues that you might, you know, that challenge you with kids and families and stuff, and understand that this thing happens to people and that is why they respond the way they do. And it's nothing, it's not a personal thing about you. It's it's bigger than that. And so you've got to take the you and that whole personal thing out of that and just move forward with the idea that this is, you know, what do you need at the moment now, right? You need me to be calm, and you need me to be kind to you, and you need me just to talk nicely to you. And, you know, I guess I've developed that persona over the years because I'm quite fiery. If you talk to my kids and stuff, you know, I can get riled up and rant and rave a bit. But I have this persona where I don't get rattled in a school sense. And I think you have to build that thing that it's not a personal attack on me. Even though you're calling me all these names, I know that you don't really mean it. And, you know, there's real power in not reacting to that. And it's a very powerful thing for kids to see that they can get angry with you and they can yell at you and they can call you all the names under the sun. But at the end of the day, you're still going to like them. And it's going to be okay. And that's a really powerful message to those kids and their families, because, you know, they can't believe sometimes that that they can come in and call you all the names under the sun because they're really hurt and upset and shame and angry. And then the next day you can walk past them and go, how you going? And they move on very quickly too. And so there's that sense of, okay, they're not going to judge. They're not going to judge. You know, it doesn't have to be shame, because that whole concept of shame is such a powerful thing. And, you know, to be non-judgmental and to be able to look at people for that they're people and not judge people because of what they might be wearing or the fact that they don't speak your language, or, you know, I guess travel's good for that, because we were talking about India earlier, Govind, and when I was in India last year in November, it was a real novelty for me to sit there and go, I'm the only white person in this bus. I'm the only white person in this bus. Now, how does that make me feel? You know, that whole reverse stuff about being the minority group and getting that real sense that you're a minority group. So, you know, thinking that for our little kids sometimes, that they're very much, you know, a little group that is looked upon as being different. And I've never really liked that. So I guess just having a good sense of myself, not taking things too personally, trying to understand the cultural aspects of what I work amongst and work in, and finding that interesting and reading a lot of things about that and talking to people about it. You know, it gives you a very rich life, really.
Yeah, thank you so much, Liz. I'll just throw it over to Kay if she had any questions or comments.
No, I don't think so at this point.
Great. Thank you so much, Liz. That was so helpful and useful, I think. We haven't even got to all the great kind of events and activities that you did at the school. I'm sure people can get in touch with you and get more information on. We really think one of the reasons we did this is because we think, you know, we really wanted to showcase the great work that Sadadeen have done over the years for the community, but also to really kind of showcase you as a real resource, I think, with all your experience and expertise in this, you know, educational leadership area. So thank you very much for your work that you've done with Sadadeen, but thank you for your time this afternoon as well.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Okay, well, we'll put up any contact details if you're looking to get in touch with Liz and wanting to know more. But apart from that, thanks everyone for listening, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.